everyone, and welcome back to Women versus Everything. This is season 1, episode 8. I'm Jess, and I am delighted to be here with my lovely co-host Grace.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our podcast. It's a women's history podcast. Every week we discuss a badass woman from history. One of us researches her, the other one researches the time and current events and culture of the period she was alive in. We sew it together on air and hope it makes sense.
Yes, and so far so good, at least based on the feedback that we have had. You can find us on all of the social medias. We are WV Everything Pod on Twitter. We are Women vs Everything on Instagram. We are also Women vs Everything on Facebook and Women vs Everything at gmail.com. And we are also on Patreon if you want to give us money. You want to give us money, right? Support independent feminist media. And that is patreon.com/women vs everything.
And we're WV Everything on buymeacoffee.com. And we also have a YouTube channel, which a lot of my research came from videos, as they did from the previous episode. So I've put playlists together. So you can click on episode 8 and watch the videos that informed my terrible knowledge for this episode.
That is really exciting.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. That is awesome. How are you doing, Grace? How's your week been?
My week's been pandemic-y.
Oh, I mean mood, but also I'm sorry.
I'm sure people are sick of us saying that. Yeah, it's been pandemic-y. I'm back at work. I work with kids under 5, and that is really good, and that's been really rewarding, but also not very safe in a pandemic, and not very hygienic at the best of times. But lockdown is just really terrible for my mental health, and I achieve a lot more even on the projects that I love when I am working. So I'm kind of grateful to be back there. I'm also house hunting for fellow Irish people listening. I'm one of these poor millennials who's trying to buy a house in this current climate, which most climates in Ireland has been terrible to buy a house in the time I've been alive. So pray for me. And if you've any tips or fun social media pages for me to follow or informative things, send them to me. It's all a bit crazy, but there has been good times, and I'm meeting a friend tomorrow to go to the beach, so it's going to be really nice.
Oh, that sounds lovely. Yay, beach.
They lifted the 5k limit here in Ireland, so I get to explore my lovely county of Cork, which is the best county. Suck it, Dublin. So different parts of the county are just completely different to each other, so it feels like a little holiday, and that's what I'm telling myself. So that's me. What about you, Jess? How is coronavirus fucking up your life this fortnight?
Yeah. Again, my week has also been pandemic-y. No, it's okay actually. I we're in that weird space now in the UK where things are starting to reopen. Quite a lot of people are vaccinated, but obviously quite a lot of people are still not. And for those who don't know, I'm 30 and I'm in a relationship with a partner who's much older. So we're in a kind of weird situation right now where my partner is vaccinated and I'm not. So that's kind of confusing all of our risk assessments around what we feel like we can do and what we want to do and all of this stuff. So it's kind of frustrating, but we are seeing actual humans tomorrow for actual, like, in real life social time, which is going to be amazing. It's going to be so good for our mental health and just for generally getting through all of this nonsense. So yay for that. And I saw something today that suggested that people my age might be getting vaccinated in about a month. So that's pretty good. That's not too much longer now, as long as that all plays out. Yeah. So that's been my week. Yeah. So you had a fabulous online birthday party last week. That was fun.
Oh, thank you. It wasn't a birthday party though.
Oh, did I miss something? I thought it was.
Yeah, you did. It was like I was 4 years sober, so it was a sober birthday.
Okay, I definitely thought it was an actual birthday as well.
No, lots of people kept saying happy birthday, and I'm like, oh wow, nobody reads the event descriptions.
I realized it was your sober anniversary. I got that, but I thought they coincided, and it was also your actual birthday. Like, I wondered if you'd stopped drinking on your birthday or something.
No, it was that, and I wanted to celebrate the launch of this podcast, and I wanted to celebrate the launch of my independent research on my website. So yeah, it was kind of like three nice things are happening around the same time of year. Let's just have a party. And yeah, it was really fun.
It was lovely, and we ended up doing a little kind of impromptu podcasting Q&A towards the end, which was really funny.
That was hilarious. It's like the subject turned to the podcast, and people were, you know, kind of saying what they thought of it and talking about funny bits. Like, for example, this bit where we don't do what we say on the tin for half the episode, and how weird it is for them to like know us and feel like we're in the room, and like lots of people replying to us as we do this bit, or wanting to join in the conversation. And yeah, people started asking us questions like about our format and about what it's like launching a podcast and what it's like, I don't know, how we came up with the idea, how we know each other, and it was just like, it was quite fun.
Yeah, it was lovely. I really enjoyed it. And congratulations again on your sober anniversary.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I didn't think I would have these amazing projects happening at all a couple of years ago, so it's been really nice to share them with you. Yeah. Yeah, because your PhD is on a very similar topic to my research, which is, go to my website, www.loveanddisgrace.co.uk, and I'm just publishing some of the interviews in kind of chapters of women that I interviewed about being in abusive relationships and polyamory. And once the interviews themselves are published, I would like to do more like thematic work and do zines and like information on just like, this is what it might look like, this is how to spot the warning signs, because, you know, we don't have that for underrepresented communities, and it's really important, you know, and there's a lot of overlap there within, I think, queerness and social justice communities as well, where there's a lot of, you know, spiritual bypassing and kind of, what's the word, like halo shining, like I'm this very enlightened person with loads of experience, so I can't be behaving like what you're saying, you know, which is fucking bullshit, you know.
Oh, yeah, so much.
Yeah,
so go and read it. It's really good. It's really good, and it's really important. So
I also you're doing the same thing, which is actually go and to a uni and get funding and do a PhD. I'm just doing this by myself because fuck everyone, you know.
I have no funding.
Oh, really?
I have no funding whatsoever. I'm totally self-funding my PhD. There is no funding for arts PhDs, sadly. I mean, there is, but like there's a tiny amount, and it's really hard to get compared to like funding in the sciences and things. So I'm just paying a university like £13,000 to in the 6 years of my life to let me be a doctor of books. It's fine.
See, I'm just not paying a university, but then I don't get to be a doctor, which I'm very upset about. I like power, again. Come on.
I'm mostly just doing it for the title and for the cool hat when I graduate. Although I should have done my PhD in Finland, because did you know in Finland when you graduate with a PhD you get a sword and a top hat?
That is so bitching. Yeah,
it's so cool, right?
Yeah, because your topic is about the intersection of gendered violence, the Me Too movement, and literature, contemporary literature. So I'm just like, if anything deserves a sword, it's that. You know? Like, to slay some misogynists.
Yes. I want that on a t-shirt. To PhD in slaying misogynists.
Yay! Oh, you could use the sword then to like chop up like books that are like just really badly written about women. Or like misogynistic books.
I love where this has gone. This is brilliant.
Yeah, let's just get all of Jordan Peterson's work and slash that in one pile.
Yep. The whole of the 50 Shades series as well while we're at it.
Oh, nice. Tag these authors, everyone. We need
Please
the publicity.
Don't. Oh my god, we don't want to get sued.
Would that stand in court, though? And I mean, speaking of all of the above, you also had a really cool publication, didn't you? About age gap relationships.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
did. I had an article published in in an American publication called Well and Good this week, which is about being in relationships with very large age gaps, which is a subject close to my heart because reasons. Yeah, so shout out to my partner for being very cool about me dissecting our relationship in the name of journalism, and obviously all the awesome case studies and experts and everything I spoke to as well. Yeah, it's been a long time in the works, that one, and I'm really proud of it. So we will pop the link in the show notes and share it on social media so people can have a read if they're interested.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, my favorite bit in that was one of the professionals said that either way it's the women demonized in, well, no, why don't you tell us? Why don't you tell us what way that was worded?
It was an academic researcher called Dr. Janet Morrison who I spoke to, an American researcher who is amazing, and she was so helpful for this article. And she did her PhD on actually age gap relationships between older women and younger men. And that was kind of the focus. But one of the things that she said when we were talking that I've included in the article is that actually, whether it's the woman who's older and she's getting labelled as like a cougar, or whether it's the woman who's younger and she's getting labelled as as like a gold digger or something, in an age gap relationship where there is a woman involved, it is always the woman who will be demonized by society.
Absolutely, that's completely true.
I thought that was really powerful and really true.
Yeah, that was definitely my favourite section.
So have a read if you're interested. Yay. Tell me what you think. Unless you think it sucks, in which case go away. Yeah. Be nice to me.
Speaking of, if you think it sucks, go away. Corrections corner, ding, 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 ding. I don't know why I feel like I have to ding it. Yeah, we had some interesting feedback from like a minority of people on our episode 7?
6 actually, I think, because 7 was the Tricksters April Fool's special, so it was the Meet Satanica episode, right?
Yes. So some people felt it was that our generalization about non-hierarchical groups, especially activist groups, never working was unfair. And yeah, I mean, we hear that. That's why we have a corrections corner. We're quite open about not being experts, and I mean, I don't know what I'm talking about ever. So yeah, on the back of that, we have an exciting announcement, which is we're looking at actually getting some guests on, and we're going to try and find a guest who is from a non-hierarchical activist group that works, and get them on to actually talk about that. Because
yes,
we are talking from our own experience. I guess our own experiences they haven't, and yeah, that could be a very Western thing. It could be a very white people thing. It could be, we're really open and curious, and we want to hear about it. We want to hear about an experience that's different. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And we, as Grace just said, we know that we're not experts in any of this. We're learning as we go. We're sharing our discoveries as we go. And we want to hear about experiences that we don't have and experiences that we can't fully represent. So yeah, we're really excited to start bringing on guests potentially to talk to some badass women about their own stories and about their own kind of backgrounds and experiences. So watch this space.
Yeah, please interact with us. Corrections Corner, your hometown heroines. If you want to be a guest, if you know someone who would be a cool guest, get in touch with us. The podcast needs friends. Let's do it.
It does.
Yeah.
And you can also just message us to tell us we're great. We're okay with that too.
I mean, that's totally fine, yeah. We've had some really nice interactions on social media as well. Ozar from the Oxfordshire Sexual Assault and Rape Crisis Centre has, responded to them being our hometown heroines, and they really liked it. They sent us a lovely message, and I think they might still be in our link tree as a donation possibility, but check them out, they're amazing. And we also have an Instagram page called Ladies of Aviation or Women of Aviation, I'm not sure, but they're tagging us in every single post. So.
Oh, that's awesome. You can tell I never check the social media. So that's amazing.
I think we should and could do an aviation themed episode at some point.
Yes, all over it. Love it. Yeah, that'd be brilliant. Anyway, shall we dive into today's topic?
Let's dive into today's topic. So today, the time period that Jess told me to research was Tudor England, which was approximately from the 1520s to 1550s. The themes. So this is an episode with all the trigger warnings in this story.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. This one comes with trigger warnings for sexual violence, including sexual violence against a minor. And there's also going to be reference to execution and brief reference to torture, although no specifics. So this one is heavy. If you need to skip it to take care of yourselves, please feel enormously free.
Absolutely. So would you like to reveal who is the person that we're talking about today?
So today we are talking about Catherine Howard. Who was the fifth wife of Henry VIII.
Yeah, I guessed it would be one of his wives, and I was leaning towards her.
I think she's one of the most interesting of the six, and I think she's also the most misunderstood.
And tragic.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like she's been so demonized by history and even by people at the time especially. So yeah, I wanted to kind of tell the story and explore kind of the other side of this story, if you like. So there's no exact information on her date of birth. Most historians think she was born in 1523 or 1524. But it could have been as early as 1521 or as late as 1525. So, little unclear on that, but 23, 24 is kind of the most commonly cited dates. She was the cousin of Anne Boleyn. They were first cousins. She was born into an aristocratic family, and she was approximately her mother's 10th child.
Ouch.
We don't know exactly the birth order, so
I have a whole thing about how pregnancy and birth here.
Oh, okay, yeah. Interesting. Yeah, so tell me more about like this time period that was frankly just brutal and horrible in a lot of ways.
So I've got some really good sources. They're all from YouTube because I couldn't really find much about women specifically from this time period. But one of the links I found on YouTube was it was kind of like Britain's worst jobs in history, or Britain's worst jobs, that series. And when it came to the Tudor period, the worst job that he said was to be a woman. So that says a lot.
Yeah, sounds legit.
Yeah, and obviously medical practice was not at its forte at the time. Around pregnancy and birth, there was this whole thing about the mother was really held responsible for miscarriages or birth defects. And there was so many superstitions, like they thought like if a mother got a shock, like, or saw something frightening while she was pregnant, that would cause a birth defect somehow. So she would have eaten something wrong. There was superstitions like tiptoeing in the May dew caused miscarriages, or looking directly at the moon. Like, just going against scripture, it seemed to be a time of a lot of the church was really in control. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And especially the Church of England at the time, which was formed in the early 1530s or maybe late 1520s. I can't remember the exact dates anyway, but when England broke away from the Catholic Church because Henry VIII wanted to marry Anne Boleyn, which was a whole other thing. Yeah, the pregnancy and birth thing is actually really pertinent to all this, because part of the reason that he had so many wives was because he was desperate for an heir and a son, and that kept sort of not happening. And of course, it was always the women who were held responsible for that. It was always their fault if they, gave birth to daughters instead, or if they didn't get pregnant or had miscarriages or whatever. It was always them who were blamed, because there was all of this superstition and all of these sort of what we now know to be slightly dodgy beliefs around it all.
Yeah, so she was born into a family where the mom had gone through this 10 times. Oh my god.
Yeah, which is astonishing, but also not particularly unusual for women at the time. That was often the case. Her mother died in about 1528, so based on the dates that we're using, she'd have been around 5 years old, and she and some of her siblings went to live with her father's stepmother, who was a woman called Agnes Howard, who was the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. Mm-hmm. So there was lots of young people, lots of children and young people living in this big communal home, really, and generally supervision was pretty lax. The Duchess was often away and didn't really seem to have that much in the way of direct involvement with the upbringing of these children that were in her care officially. So Catherine wasn't particularly well educated, which was pretty normal at the time for women in particular. She could read and write. She enjoyed dancing. She's described as having had a nurturing side, particularly towards animals. And her personality has been described with words like vivacious, giggly. One historian described her as not conventionally beautiful, but graceful and charming. Yeah, so this is the context of she's living in this, home with lots of other young people and is, fairly little in the way of supervision. And then in around 1536, when she'd have been probably about 13, although again, anywhere between kind of 11 and 15, depending on which dates you believe, she started having music lessons with a man called Henry Mannix, who his age is unknown, but somewhere between mid-20s and mid-30s. So much older than her. And some of the sources say that she was, quote, seduced by him, but I think it's fair to say that the more proper term is sexually abused.
Yeah, groomed for sure.
Absolutely. So there's a popular theory that was first put forward by a historian in 2004, and that's that the relationship was abusive, that Mannix was grooming her, preying on her, whereas other biographers have suggested that actually maybe he was more like closer to her age and maybe it actually took place over a shorter period of time. But there's a quote here that says their relationship was nonetheless inappropriate on several levels, to which I've put in brackets, I mean, yeah, he was her teacher.
Yeah, and so she was between 11 and 13, did you say?
Somewhere between 11 and 15, probably around about 13.
So we're talking about statutory rape at best if he's younger,
I mean, interestingly, not at the time, not legally.
Oh, I meant by today's standards, yeah.
But by today's standards, 100%, yeah, absolutely. It's generally agreed by most historians now that it was not a consensual, joyful relationship. So much later on, Catherine and Mannix both confessed to having engaged in some form of sexual contact, but they both maintained that they never had intercourse. There's a quote from Catherine that appears again and again, where she says, "At the flattering and fair persuasions of Mannix, being but a young girl, I suffered him at sundry times to touch and handle the secret parts of my body, which neither became me with honesty to permit nor him to require." Doesn't sound consensual.
No, that's
really
heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's really upsetting. It's really, really upsetting. So the Duchess, her guardian, eventually just kind of found out about this and said that they were not to be left alone together. But it seems like she wasn't that concerned generally about what the girls under her care were doing, as long as eventually they got married off to someone who was befitting their station, as this source phrases it. So Catherine probably cut off contact with Mannix in around 1538. So she'd have been 15, 16, something like that. And shortly afterwards, she was pursued by another man named Francis Derham, who was a secretary in the Duchess's household. He'd have been somewhere between 29 and 32 at the time. Mm-hmm. Allegedly, they were lovers and even went as far as to address each other as husband and wife. Derham entrusted Catherine with various kind of things like keeping money safe for him when he went away. And a lot of the people in this household where she was living kind of knew about this and knew that this was going on until the Duchess found out, which again she was not very happy about. But there is some suggestion that Catherine and Derham had something called a pre-contract of marriage, which essentially, if they'd agreed to this pre-contract and then had sex, that they would have been considered married in the eyes of the church at the time. Mm-hmm. Clearly, they didn't get married. That didn't happen. There's an article from BBC History magazine in 2016 by a historian called Josephine Wilkinson, and she claims that both the relationships with Mannix and Derham were non-consensual. And one of the quotes reads, "While living with the Duchess of Norfolk, Catherine was sexually exploited by two men of the household. Both men took advantage of their position of authority in the household, and Catherine had no means of defending herself."
That's terrible. The poor thing.
Yeah, it's really, really upsetting, and it's really heartbreaking. I mean, obviously, most people know kind of what happens next, not getting into the rest of the story, but it's so upsetting that she's got this reputation as, quote, the slutty one, as a charming source described it. And it's so upsetting because actually when you look at this, we're talking about a young teenage girl who was serially abused by much older men in positions of power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that is suffering from trauma, is suffering from PTSD, which sometimes looks like, I don't know, reenacting those situations or putting yourself in risky situations. And if that did lead to her having a level of promiscuity, she was still the victim. She was still the teenager who was abused by men in power in both those situations. That maybe if the second one was a bit more consensual, there also might have been a level of reenacting there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, he's a man in power who should have known better.
Yeah, 100%.
But the ultimate man in power of the country at the time did not know better either.
Yep, as we will see in a minute.
Yeah, and you see, like, as well how you said with the Duchess, that kind of thing of, like, similar to the Empress that we talked about in Maria Anna Mozart's time, you know, like, gifting Marie Antoinette to King Louis at the time. You know, women were seen as something you could gift to a person, or like a tool or a means to infiltrate or elevate yourself. They weren't quite, like, they really weren't seen as their own people.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That they were property in every kind of legal sense. Mm-hmm. There's a quote here that I've pulled out of one of the sources that I read, which I thought was really interesting, which says, historians have failed to consider the importance of language. One historian noted that the language used by men and women to describe sexual experiences was fundamentally gendered. As noted in relation to Catherine, not one of her comments indicates she enjoyed the affair with Derham, or for that matter Manox, since a girl's loss of maidenhead in a society esteeming virginity could result in emotional as well as painful physical issues. So this is the other thing, of course. This is a time when, for women, for girls in particular, virginity is everything. Like, purity is so highly prized.
Yeah, and any rumour about that would threaten society's sense of that purity about you was almost a death sentence in how much you would be de-escalated from social standing.
Yeah, absolutely,
you know?
absolutely.
And that social standing might be linked to your family having enough money, being able to put food on the table, being part of the community. You know, you might be shunned by the entire community for, by a rumour.
Yeah, absolutely. And even in a situation where you're the victim of something, it could still go in that direction.
Yeah, of course.
And girls and women at the time would have been so keenly aware of that. They'd have been taught that from birth, more or less. Mm-hmm. This sort of idea that's quite popular of Catherine as this silly, frivolous, empty-headed girl who was just running around doing whatever she wanted without knowing better. It's like, no, I don't buy that.
Yeah,
because
and
it would have been so drilled into her.
And also, for most of the story we're telling, she's a teenager. Of course she was silly and frivolous. That's what happens when you marry teenagers. That's why no one does it, you know?
That's what teenagers do. Yeah, and
exactly,
honestly,
they're a nightmare.
That was the same in the 1500s, and it's the same now.
Exactly. Oh, God bless her. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I was doing some research, I came across information about sex during Tudor times, and it was strictly confined to the marriage in bed, forbidden during Lent, feast days, Advent, Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays.
So you'd better get it on when you can, because you don't have that much time when it's okay. Wow.
I mean, Lent is 40 days as it is. Like, that's a lot of time.
Yeah, that's like a while.
So, despite that, you were like, it was really important you got pregnant. So it was considered imperative that the woman found the experience enjoyable to get pregnant. So they thought there was a link between women's enjoyment and pregnancy. And as a result of that, there is texts that survive that contain information about foreplay, about different positions that would guarantee boys or girls. And it led to, unfortunately, the bit where we were talking about, like, how any tools can be used for good or evil. You know, the dark side of that is that it led for women to feel like they had to be up for it all the time. And had to perform and I guess fake it. It's where faking it comes from.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also leads to some really horrendous things that, like, people still believe. The example that I was thinking of was that Republican politician who infamously essentially said that a woman can't get pregnant from rape because if she gets pregnant, it means that she enjoyed it, which is like not a thing at all and is just a horrifying thing to say. But yeah, that happened, and that was like, what, 5 years ago? It was recent.
So his sex ed is that of the 1500s England.
Yeah, which is pretty damning.
I mean, it was, sex was just so focused on reproductivity, and that's kind of what the woman's role in it was. Like, it was really common for fertility symbols like acorns and grapes to be carved into a couple's bed, but there was this belief that men needed to purge regularly to not have a build-up of fluid. And I think there's still some men out there believe that as well. Like, that I know that's definitely a thing I've seen in like popular culture of like men using, well, boys using to pressure women into sleeping with them. Like, oh, it's unhealthy if there's all the pressure and like the build up, and it's, you know, so making out with me and then not fucking me is unhealthy for me, basically.
Spoiler, no, it's not.
It's really not.
This is the context of how sex was viewed in this kind of time.
When a woman was pregnant, they were so fickle about like everything caused miscarriages that obviously there wasn't any sex during pregnancy. And during this time, therefore, it was really appropriate for men to have affairs because it would be bad for them to have a build-up of fluid.
It's amazing how all of this is just really conveniently set up to benefit anything that men want to do, isn't it?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's quite eye-opening.
So, this was the context in which, so Catherine ended up in the King's court. She ended up in the household of Anne of Cleves, who was, of course, wife number 4. So this would have been in 1540 when she was probably around 17, maybe a little bit younger. You know, she was young, she was pretty. Obviously, you know, the king had his eye on her very quickly. He hadn't really displayed very much interest in Anne right from the beginning, and their marriage was annulled after only about 6 months.
Want to hear how they met?
Yeah, go on.
So they never met face to face, but Henry was interested in her. So he had this artist, Hans Holbein, commissioned to paint her and told her, don't hold back, don't flatter her. And he immediately agreed to marry her on seeing her portrait. And the portrait was like this Renaissance ideal of beauty. So listen to this. The Renaissance ideal of beauty for women was to be well proportioned, graceful, like not too much one thing or the other. So it was like all about moderation, because they thought this showed harmony within the body. Being too skinny was poor or ill health. Good to have like clear skin, good teeth, and to smell like a woman, which means like a natural smell, because it was thought like spices and perfumes and stuff would be to cover up bad smells from rotten teeth or sores. Well made and built for giving birth to children, which is the hourglass shape. And they lightened their complexion with lemon juice. And the Tudor red gold hair was very sought after, but it was quite rare. So they made a contract to marry each other. And then when Henry met her, he didn't agree that she looked like the portrait.
Yep.
But you want to hear what's the worst of it? At this point, there's quite a lot of evidence that Henry was impotent. At the time, he was so overweight that 3 of his biggest men at court could fit into his doublet. He was so overweight he had to be winched onto his horse and needed a special contraption to get up and down stairs due to a leg injury, which was festering. So he's walking around with this big rotten leg injury and is massively overweight, which was like partly due to his disability, but also a lot due to he loved his food, he loved his wine. There was no moderation when it came to his body. Horrific, but you know, Anne of Cleves wasn't good enough for him. So I do wonder if he blamed her for the impotence and just thought he'd try again. Jane Seymour was before Anne of Cleves, wasn't she?
Yes, and she was the one who had a son and then died.
King Henry had his injury in 1536 in a tournament. So it's like jousting, you know, and you can't cheat in jousting. It's like playing chicken. So people couldn't and didn't let him win because he was king, because it's very, how would you throw a game of jousting, you know? So he got injured He was unconscious for 2 hours, which marked a change in his personality. So I think there was a head injury. And it was kind of on this part, after this accident, he became this kind of mad, depressed, paranoid Henry the Tyrant persona that we hear about now. His leg was ulcerated for the rest of his life after this injury. Obviously, there was no antibiotics, so it was just in this constant cycle of reinfection and festering. And Court and his most trusted confidants became completely frightened of him and his outbursts, and they were sometimes physical after this accident. And he also just kind of seemed to enjoy it, and enjoy it that people found him unpredictable and unreadable. Then he gets with Jane Seymour. Within 7 months of marriage, she was pregnant. This is 1538, 2 years after this accident. So it was believed that women should experience the full manifestation of original sin, which is pain. So she had a 36-hour labour, and midwives could use opium, but they were often admonished for it by people who thought women should experience pain, and instead they would use willow bark, which is what today's aspirin is made from, and prayer. Prayer sure helps.
Yeah, that obviously worked out well for Jane, didn't it?
Oh, poor Jane. So yeah, there was meant to be this whole thing called lying in during birth, where only female attendants and the midwife would be there during birth, and men were strictly forbidden. But Henry was so anxious about having an heir at this point that he changed things up, and men were in the chamber, and they all put their name to a letter. There was a physician, Sir William Butts, and there was lots of this concern about Jane and the survival of her child. It had fatal consequences, because there was these male physicians in here now that had detached knowledge about birth, because the norm then was to have midwives. So not only did these men have lived experience, they also had no professional experience. And then there's a status problem about men touching the Queen's body. So it's thought that during poor Jane's birth, they stood back and probably consulted academically while the women did the hands-on work. But then these are experienced midwives who have a status problem with these physicians. And we don't know what happened. And they think there was a lot of conflict, actually, as to who would have the final say, while this poor woman is in a 36-hour labour. So she gave birth to James, but died 12 days later. And they think it was due to unsanitary conditions or the retained placenta. And the thought around a retained placenta is, again, the midwives were just not allowed to get in and do their thing and their expertise, which would have normally noticed this, but the physicians there would have overstepped it. And Henry was devastated, like he might have really loved Jane Seymour. He didn't remarry for more than 2 years, which was the longest period he went without a wife in the course of his reign. But during this whole time, marriage negotiations were taking place after a few months, because he did have a duty to marry and father more children, being the king. But yeah, I imagine on top of his head injury and his physical festering injury, and now he's bereaved. I mean, poor Anne of Cleves didn't stand a chance, basically.
No.
Nor did Catherine Howard.
So yeah, into all of this walks Catherine, who's 17 at this point. So she comes in as a lady in waiting to Anne.
Anne
obviously gets Henry's attention very quickly, because that's what he was like. And because he'd never really been all that interested in Anne, and their marriage was annulled pretty soon afterwards, Catherine's family saw an opportunity here.
Wow.
To gain influence, to gain power, to have more influence towards the fight to restore Roman Catholicism, which was something that they were very interested in as well. And obviously, as the king got more and more interested in Catherine, her family got more and more influence as well. There's really some suggestions that really they were pushing her at him. Really, they were manipulating. Really, they were manipulating both of them, and they were using her as a pawn in their fight to get what they wanted, essentially, which was often the way with girls and women back then. They were often essentially used as pawns in their family's politics.
So she was a cousin of the Boleyn sisters, so they also knew how horrible Henry was and had seen what had happened to his previous wives. And still pushed her into this. That's disgusting.
Yeah, it's horrifying. It's like after what he did to her cousin, and they're still like, yeah, go for it. Seems like a great idea. No, it's horrible.
Just
it's
for
really
non-UK
horrible.
listeners, do you want to say anything about the Boleyns?
Yeah, so very, very quick summary. So Anne Boleyn was Henry's second wife. She's the one who he broke England away from the Roman Catholic Church in order to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon and marry Anne. But after, I want to say it was only like 3 years, she was accused of adultery, almost certainly completely fabricated charges, and she was beheaded. And that was Catherine's first cousin.
Yeah, beheaded, and her family are like, hey, we got this guy for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the context of all of that, like the fact that they're probably piling all this pressure on her and pushing her at him and saying, yeah, get into his good books, essentially. And again, we're talking about a teenager and a woman. What choice did she have?
Growth.
So they got married in July of 1540. Catherine adopted a motto which I am not going to try to pronounce, but the translation is "no other wish but his." So she's clearly trying to, present this very sort of demure, submissive, subservient persona, which was very much in line with what was expected of women back then. It seems as though in the early days, at least, that Henry was genuinely, I don't know if you would say in love with her, genuinely, very, very enamored with her, and he spoiled her. He gave her lots of very expensive gifts, gave her everything she wanted. She didn't really have much to do with matters of state, which some of his other wives had done in the past, mostly just because she was super, super young. And there was no, interestingly, she was never actually crowned. There was no plans made to crown her as queen, although it was said later on that essentially she would be crowned as soon as it was proven that she was pregnant.
Oh, interesting.
Which she never was. Yeah.
I think also the public were quite concerned about Henry at this point, and maybe they wanted to just be like, let's just keep this marriage on the down low.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So it was public knowledge. People kind of knew.
Yeah.
But yeah, she was never actually formally crowned, which is really interesting, actually. And yes, it does say at this point that by this time the king was prone to volatile outbursts, prone to mood swings, had a scary amount of power at his disposal. Having executed one wife and also his most trusted advisor, Thomas Cromwell. So you can imagine this teenage girl with no experience in any of this, string of abusive relationships behind her, and now she's married to this tyrant who also happens to have essentially unlimited power.
And had enlarged arteries with pale, sweaty skin, according to this description.
Yeah, it's like slightly precarious position, I would say.
Yeah, he was 30 years her senior as well at that point.
Yes, he was around 49 or 50 at this time.
That's like, no offense to 49 and 50-year-olds who, are of different body shapes and might have different impairments. That's like, just Henry VIII is just gross in general.
He's just a vile human. But also, yes, shame if you are 50 years old and sleeping with 17-year-olds. Do not.
I mean...
Yeah.
Turn this off right now. You can't sit with us.
Yeah. So, while she was at court before she married Henry, she had some kind of relationship with a man called Thomas Culpeper. And there was rumours that they might get married. There was rumours that they were meeting secretly. A love letter was found where he referred to her as my little sweet fool, which not the nicest, but okay, supposedly a term of endearment. Some people believe that she carried on her affair with him after she'd married the king.
Oh God.
Yeah, which there's no evidence of really conclusively one way or the other. There's some evidence that suggests that she was in love with him, or that at least she was infatuated with him, and that she kind of felt that as long as the king was happy, everything would be fine, and as long as he didn't know, everything would be fine. And surprisingly, it actually took a while before it all came out, assuming that any of this was happening.
Yeah.
But Culpeper, also a garbage human.
Oh no!
I know, this poor girl. It's so upsetting.
Can I just say, if this is a moment where your unconscious bias went, oh, she was just attracting awful men, can we correct that to awful men are attracted to vulnerable women?
Yes.
Mm.
So, yeah, so it seems as though he was using her affections to further his own ambitions. There's also a story that he had supposedly raped a woman. He'd raped a park keeper's wife and then had murdered a villager who tried to rescue her.
What a prick!
Yeah. And Henry pardoned him for that. So there's not that much known about him generally, but what we know about him, he was not a nice person. He was kind of terrible. It's generally believed that he was obviously very aware that the king wasn't in very good health, and he had the sense that if Henry died and he was in Catherine's good graces, then she would still have quite a lot of power and influence as the Queen Dowager. And at that point, he could, move in and take advantage.
I think one of the things that would have supported their affair to continue for so long was Henry was so sick at this point. Like, he had this thing where he kind of wanted to protect this young wife from, like, seeing him as infirm or elderly. So he would just refuse to see her for weeks on end when he was actually in bed recovering with his leg injury. So she was left for weeks on end, feeling abandoned by this guy who's supposed to be her husband. And therefore, I think, that's where some of this went unnoticed,
Yeah. So Culpeper eventually admitted that he had intended to sleep with her, but he never admitted to having actually done so. It's impossible to know for sure whether or not they ever actually did. But it certainly seems like he took advantage of her. And again, we have to remember that we're talking about a survivor of serial abuse who was probably about 17 or 18 at this time. So this is the full kind of context of this. So obviously, in the end, Henry finds out. Henry Mannix, who was the music teacher from the beginning of this story, he supposedly was bragging essentially about the ways in which he knew Catherine, and also incriminated Francis Dereham by essentially saying that he'd slept with her as well. And the interesting thing about this is that if Catherine's relationship with Dereham, if it had been proven that they'd had this pre-contract of marriage, would have essentially invalidated her marriage to the king, because she would have been considered already married according to the laws of the church. Mm-hmm. But they denied it. She denied it. Dereham denied it. And she essentially claimed that there had been no pre-contract, there'd been no engagement between them. And the irony of all of this is actually, if she'd admitted to that, she might have survived, because at that point she could have been charged with bigamy, and she could have been sent away in shame and disgrace, but she probably wouldn't have been killed.
Shit.
But obviously she didn't know that at the time, of course, and so she didn't admit to it. She denied it, and then she was questioned about her relationship with Culpeper, and she admitted to him using that term of endearment with her, admitted to giving him gifts, but she maintained that she had never slept with him. And in fact, she claimed that he had essentially pestered her and harassed her, which would make sense given everything that we know about all of this. So there's a woman called Lady Rochford, who was her, I guess, lady in waiting, who supposedly had helped Catherine and Culpeper to meet in secret, and she was questioned as well, and she said that she thought the two of them had slept together, considering, quote, all the things she had heard and seen between them. But again, who knows if she said that because it was true, or if she said that to save her own skin. It's impossible to know.
Yeah.
So Thomas Cranmer detailed all of these allegations, left a letter for Henry outlining all of this. At first he didn't believe it, but then he ordered this investigation, which supposedly was supposed to clear Catherine's name, and clearly didn't, and things went rapidly downhill very quickly. So Dereham and Culpeper were both arrested and tortured and confessed. Mannix was released, interestingly. So Catherine confessed to the illicit communications, and to meeting with Culpeper, but she never stated that she was guilty of adultery. And again, there's this quote I've pulled out of the source, which I think is really interesting, which says, any analysis of her life, or that of any pre-modern woman more broadly, must factor in contemporary gender expectations. Attention must be directed to social and cultural constructions of both sexuality and honour. The failure to do so in previous accounts has resulted in the general acceptance that Catherine's sexual affairs were consensual and voluntary. Which actually, it seems like maybe in a lot of ways they weren't. So she wrote this letter to Henry, essentially confessing and begging for his forgiveness, but she was stripped of her title as queen in November of 1541. She'd only been queen for about 18 months at this point, less than that, like 15 months at this point.
I thought she wasn't given the title.
She was never crowned, but she was referred to as queen or queen consort.
Okay.
I'm not quite sure exactly what the difference is there, but yeah. So her title was taken from her, and she was essentially locked up at somewhere called Sion House, where she remained there for 2 months. And during that time, the Parliament passed something called a Bill of Attainder, which essentially made it treasonable, punishable by death for a queen consort to fail to disclose her sexual history to the king within 20 days of marriage.
Ugh.
Or to incite someone to commit adultery with her. So essentially this retroactively meant that the pre-contract with Derham that she may or may not have had, and the sexual contact that she'd had with those two men before her marriage made her guilty. That's it. There was never a trial. Just this law was written in to essentially retroactively find her guilty.
Knowing the royal family, those probably still exist.
The alarming thing is, yeah, probably.
Yeah. Yikes. Oh, God.
Yeah. So, as everyone knows, this story does not have a happy ending. Derham and Culpeper were both executed on the 10th of December in 1541, and Catherine was executed on the 13th of February, 1542. Yeah. What's the word? There's a popular kind of myth that her last words were, "I die a queen, but I would rather have died the wife of Culpeper."
Wow.
But that's probably not actually true. It's interesting. It appears in a lot of contemporary kind of retellings of this, like in the TV series The Tudors, for example. They show that's how they show it. But yeah, probably not true. In fact, it seems like what she actually did was stuck to some fairly traditional final words, which essentially was asking for forgiveness for her sins and acknowledging that she deserved to die for betraying the king.
Oh.
Yeah. And she was probably 19 or 20 when she died, although, depending on the source you believe, could have been as young as 17.
That's so sad.
Yeah, it's really, this one is awful. I knew I wanted to tell this story, but it's just so relentlessly sad from beginning to end. It's like this poor girl never had a chance.
I think in the same way in some contemporary media as well, I've seen her reclaimed as kind of like an icon of like wronged women with vengeful spirits, you know, like I think quite a few of Henry's wives were mentioned in the Netflix version of Sabrina the Teenage Witch,
interesting.
as former, you know, as in the witch lineage. For, you know, I like that reclamation, but it's just so tragic, and I think so many retellings of this story are so focused on Henry and the drama and the illicit affair and the like, whoa, and it's like there was this teenager, she was 17.
Right, exactly. And she's always seen as like, oh, she's the one who had all the affairs or who was really promiscuous. And it's like, actually, when you strip all this away, there's a teenage sexual abuse victim at the heart of all this. So the reason that I really wanted to cover this one was because I've been re-listening to the soundtrack to the musical Six.
I don't know anything about this.
Oh my god, it's amazing. So it's a contemporary musical that reimagines the six Tudor queens as a pop group, as like a girl group. I know, it's brilliant. And they essentially they've got together to make an album about how much Henry screwed them all over.
Yes! Oh my god!
And like the sort of framing of the show is they're competing to see like which one of them got the worst deal.
Yeah. Does she
And
win?
like it was Catherine Howard,
It's
obviously,
Catherine won,
but
yeah.
you know, I think all of them, with the possible exception of Anne of Cleves, got a pretty rough deal out of it.
Yes. And what about his final wife? I thought she did okay.
Well, yeah,
Catherine Parr.
yeah, well, she survived, but she like had to marry him when she was in love with someone else, which was kind of a
Oh no!
bummer.
Oh
Yeah.
God, because even in the stuff I looked at was just like, you know, she was 31, she was witty, she was intelligent, she was a great personality match for the king, and she basically nursed him until he died, you know? So she's kind of
Yeah.
painted as this like very understanding, empathic person, but oh God, you just don't get to do anything you want to do.
I know. So in six, all of the queens are modelled after like different pop stars essentially. And the Catherine character is modelled after a kind of Ariana Grande, Britney Spears mashup.
Yes.
And so they all have a song, and hers is this song called "All You Want to Do," and it's this very kind of one article I read described it as like bubblegum pop.
Mm.
It's this very kind of upbeat. It sounds like a Britney Spears song. It really does, and it starts off with her kind of bragging that she's really attractive and that all these men want her. I mean, the opening line of the song is, "I think we can all agree that I'm the 10 amongst these threes."
Yes.
Yeah, but then you actually listen to it and you listen to the lyrics, and actually very soon it gets into this. It's just this litany of trauma. It's just like there's all these men who like screwed her over, and the character ends up kind of like falling apart a bit on stage when she's telling this story. It's really upsetting.
It's beautiful.
But I think it's really interesting the way that she's portrayed, because she you know, the people that she's modelled after were, you know, people, you know, real women, contemporary women who were in the public eye from a young age, who were often like aggressively sexualized.
Mm-hmm.
Thought it was an interesting portrayal, and it's a great musical and everyone should listen to it. It's brilliant, and it's actually like, and it's really nice and empowering, because like at the end they have this song that's all of them, where they essentially like rewrite their own stories, and like they imagine what would have happened if they'd never married him. It is brilliant. We all
Can I tell you about the Tudor tradition, which is where the term airing the dirty linen comes from?
Yes, absolutely. I don't know this one.
Really? I thought you'd have come across it in your research.
No,
yeah.
I don't think I do know this one.
So I saw this in an episode of Game of Thrones, and I was like, I thought it was some made up, fucked up shit, but apparently it really happened. So, wedding night, it was customary for a bedding ceremony, which is that all the courtiers would put the newly married couple to bed to make sure the marriage was consummated.
Oh God! So no pressure or anything. Wow.
No, I mean, so imagine she's 17 with her fucking 50 whatever year old obese impotent husband, and she's like, yeah, so there's a procession of singing and dancing the couple to the bedchamber, where the bed would be blessed while they were lying in it. And then there would be curtains drawn around the bed and the door closed, but witnesses would wait outside the door for sounds. And airing the dirty linen came from afterwards. The bed sheets would be shown the next morning, and they would be expected to be stained with the virginal blood of the bride.
Oh God, that's horrible. That is truly, truly horrible.
If that didn't occur, the validity of the marriage would be questioned.
Because they'd assume she wasn't a virgin.
Yeah, or that they didn't manage to have sex, which is not valid, because the only reason you get married is to procreate.
Obviously.
Yeah, you just...
Oh God, that is just like, my entire body is just like cringing at that.
Blech. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
It's so horrible.
And I think this is also really valid. It more affects working class women, but this is again about like, this is what would happen to women who made a noise or made a fuss or spoke too much. But there was a thing called a scold. And the guy from Worst Jobs in History, he said especially fishwife was the worst job, because they had to be noisy and get noticed to sell their wares and feed their family. But it was illegal for women to do so at the time. So a scold basically would be that, like, a woman who's being too mouthy would be carted off by a group of men. There was a thing called a scold's bridle, which fitted over the woman's head with a piece inside the mouth on the tongue so that the woman couldn't speak. And there was a bit at the front under the chin where like a rope would be tied through, and then she would be paraded through the street like that for group shame.
So horrible.
And punishment. And like the guy was just in bits after reenacting this. He was like, it was so sore and covered in my own spit. He was so angry, you know? And they have records from that time of the people that went through, the women that went through this. But the only record, there's no names. It just says wife of blah.
Oh.
So, because they were just seen as property.
Yeah.
And if that didn't work, then you got a ducking stool, which was you were levered out over to a river and dunked in and out again.
Oh.
So there was a lot of classism around this objectification of what it meant to be feminine. So, like, I don't know, for me, it just reminded me a little bit of this, like, how sometimes lower class women are seen as less classically feminine.
Yeah.
Life expectancy for a woman was 35 years and 1 in 3 women died in childbirth. So, yeah, it was horrendous.
It's really horrible time to be a woman.
So this is the context of even wealthy women with a level of power could not stand there and be like, hey, this is fucking ridiculous. Why haven't I seen my husband for 2 weeks? You know?
Yeah.
You know, tell him I'm off with my friends for 2 weeks, see how he likes it, you know? Or just like, no, I'm not marrying this person. You know, I don't care how much money they have, I'm not doing it. They might not have been subjected to those exact punishments, but it was, you know, we don't know what went on in private families where they just consider their daughters objects, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. That is the context for all of this. This is in a very real sense, this is a time when women were property and had no say. Patriarchy sucks.
It does suck, yeah. And just remember that's the system that is still, you know, alive, and there's still echoes of that. So next time a woman is too gobby and pisses you off, it's like, it's that echo of women should be seen and not heard, you know?
Yeah. I feel really depressed after that one.
Yeah. What do we do when we're super bummed out and depressed by our stories?
Basic bitch gratitude corner.
Yes. Okay. Let's think of things we're grateful for. I'm really grateful my website is up and I'm actually publishing this independent research and I have 3 chapters of it up already. If you go to www.loveanddisgrace.co.uk and join the newsletter, you'll get updates on when the next chapter of each bit is available. My friends Rupert, Alison and Wilrika have made a guide, and it's called, like, it's a system for spotting signs of spiritual abuse within spiritual communities. And I'll put a link for that up on our show notes and social media. What else am I grateful for? I'm really grateful for, like, my favorite podcast, which inspired me to do this. My favorite murder. Yeah, like, I think a lot of the feedback we got, like, about doing this podcast, it was, like, all the stuff I love about my favorite murder that I wanted to recreate in this. So, yeah, I'm just so grateful for Karen and Georgia from that, and they're just spirit. They're so cool.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm grateful for friends this week. I've had a bit of a rough week, to be honest. It's been a bit crap. Kind of physical and mental health took a bit of a nosedive. So yeah, I'm just grateful for having really lovely friends who I can talk to, who cheer me up, I think that's my one for this week. I am grateful for all the lovely people in my life, of which there are many.
Well done, you got through it.
Yeah, came out the other side, and it's a process. I mean, you know, pandemic times continue, but we're getting there. We're doing better, which is good. You know, all these. Sometimes it just feels so bleak, but then you come out the other end of it, and it's like, okay, we'll survive that. That's good.
You know, and the bleakness is okay. The bleakness is normal.
Yeah.
It's people who aren't feeling bleak I worry about.
Right, absolutely. It's like, is anyone actually, like, fine right now? I mean, apart from Tory politicians, and we don't care about them.
They're not people. Like, I said people.
Fair.
Tweet them too. Tag them. Don't. I don't want to
Speaking
talk
of politicians, we have a hometown heroine that was submitted.
Yay, a hometown heroine. Tell me all about it.
Yeah, so this week's hometown heroine was submitted by an anonymous listener who is based in Nottingham, which is actually not massively far from where I live. And they have nominated Nadia Whittome, who is a Labour Party MP, who is currently the baby of the house, so the youngest MP. And she's also a member of the Socialist Campaign Group and just generally awesome lefty progressive political human who we like very much.
Yay, Nadia!
Yay!
Yay.
So that is our hometown heroine of the week, and thank you to the listener who submitted that suggestion. And if you want to talk to us about someone awesome in your hometown or where you live or doing awesome things, let us know.
Yeah, they can be current or any time in history. It can also be an organisation or a collection of women, or we'll take kind of anything at this point. I do have one for our next episode as well, and it is also a politician, so that's quite interesting.
Oh, amazing. Okay, exciting. So we will be back in 2 weeks. Until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, embrace the bleakness. Sometimes it's going to happen, and love women.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
I can tell you some sites to see. I don't know where this is. Hampton Court.
Oh, yeah, I've been there. It's beautiful.
There's an astrological clock, which was commissioned by Henry VIII. They were really into astrology back then. And there's a wine fountain, which belongs to Henry VIII as well.
Amazing.
And if you go to the Tower of London, you can see Henry's armour and see how big it is.